Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn today with our Center for Military Transition Executive Director, JD Dew, Jonathan Dew, or whatever he wants to go by here. It's his preference. But, we were talking before I let everyone in. JD and I have become old friends. We talk pretty often about things related to military and how we can support each other. And he wants to have the opportunity to share what he's doing for our military related students here in the Mason School. A lot of great things going on with that program that he has built from the ground up. He was given a blank sheet of paper, as Dean Pulley has said, and was able to prescribe what we will be doing with this program to make it successful and make it excellent and help our students along their way to transition from the military to the business world. So without further ado, here is JD.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. I feel that if we did start with a blank sheet, man, it was a really well prepared blank sheet with a lot of work and a lot of passion that went into things long before I got here. Yeah, I want to take a couple of minutes just in some cases to set some broad context in terms of what military transition sort of is, what it looks like, some of the challenges that are there, and then talk about some of the activities and the opportunities that really revolve around an extraordinary foundation that is not new, right? This center might be new, but the broad activities and the opportunities date back probably decades, and that's a really, really important piece, I think, for all of us to understand. So to start off, actually, earlier this week, I spent about 20 minutes, and it was, I would argue, probably the 20 best minutes that I spent this week, aside from some meetings with some of y'all, but actually watching Dr. Martin Luther King's Blueprint for Life speech. It was about 6 months before he was tragically murdered. He's talking to junior high students, but it is 20 minutes well spent, just at the height of his influence, at the height of his brilliance. And he offers these words about, what a blueprint does, and this notion to serve as a pattern of a guide, and to make sure that it has to be good and solid and sound before moving forward. And it struck me, and particularly in the context of an educational space, and in the context of looking at choice and opportunity. That's a wonderful thing to keep in mind as we move forward. The other interesting thing, that blueprint is actually the blueprint from the Pentagon, which was constructed more rapidly in 1940 than it was repaired after the attacks in 2001, just to sort of keep those things in mind. But I think this notion of our architectural endeavors is actually a pretty powerful analogy. So now we're going to start with a little bit of interaction and to paint some picture on some potential context. So on the screen, I'm going to put up a couple of different numbers, and feel free to just chime in verbally what some of these numbers actually might mean. Of 200,000, and again, I didn't know all of these numbers, but it could be fun just to take some guesses. 200,000, 15,000, 185 and 29. Those pairs sort of go together, and then 7%. Any thoughts on what these contextual numbers might be from anybody?
Number of jelly beans in the jar?
No, it is almost that fun, but I appreciate that, Patrice. That would be a wonderful jar. Oh, 200,000 military members active duty. That's close. That's actually the number of military members who transition each year. Okay. Each year, 200,000. So that's in terms of like just sort of broad context of what we're looking at. The 7% is actually the percent of the working population who identify as veterans. The broader population is actually larger. A key thing to keep in mind is the presence of the draft throughout World War II, throughout the Korean War, the Vietnam War. that just created a much larger military than we have today. But as those veteran populations age, 7% is actually, I think, a really important thing for us to keep in mind as well, just in terms of the populations that we work with. But yeah, so 200,000 military service members transition each year. 15,000 of those transition here in the Hampton Roads area, right? And that's actually coming out of 29 different military installations that are 90 minutes from Miller Hall. So in terms of both the demography that is there, in terms of demographics, the geography that's there, I think those are really, really sort of interesting things to keep in mind. Now, a couple of other numbers, we got some rates, right? So the 2.x and 2.3 is a more likely piece. And then the 62% is just a totally random number. So we are moving away from things that could potentially be eaten or are jelly beans in a jar. Any other thoughts on what those numbers might be? Just random thoughts, random guesses. Ooh, unemployment rates? No. Thankfully not. Thankfully not on that. Right now, actually, the unemployment rate for veterans is holding relatively steady in terms of the broader population. Underemployment for many veterans, as well as military spouses, is a little bit more of a challenge. But this is actually recent data conducted specifically for the veteran community, that they are almost 3 times more likely to find a job that they want if they engage with a mentor or a coach for both interviewing content, and then just a little bit less on that in terms of resume writing content. And I found those were wonderful examples to highlight, because again, that's something that has been going on here for a while and is done at a very, very high quality, both within the GCMC, the Executive Partner Program, I think key components, and then just the correlation of the veteran student population. This is a national statistic as well, with those that are first generation low income students, is another key thing to keep in mind. Another number, $100,000. Any thoughts on what this might be? I actually fooled myself when I did some math on this one. It's actually almost 2 statistics. That is the actual average monetary value of the post 9/11 GI Bill, which again can be used by veterans. It can also be transferred to spouses and dependents. But again, I think a remarkable piece on that. It is almost also almost the same average salary that our veteran MBA students have immediately transitioned and that were job seekers. That average is actually $100,061. So it's an interesting and very, very random correlation as well. So those are some of the fun facts. These next sort of numbers are actually sort of the not so fun facts that are there. This is out of a recent Pew survey, and that almost 2/3 of veterans have described their transition out of uniform as either being difficult or very difficult. Other, I think, important components that are there, and I know many of us have talked about this before, is that veterans are articulating the need for time to figure things out. Over half do, which I think is an important sort of functional role we all contribute to, as well as this notion of the sense of purpose. And I think whenever those components of mentorship that are a clear aspect of the culture that's here, of the guidance that all of our students receive, I think those are really, really key components. Because again, these numbers I think are high for this population as well. Kim, I saw your question on the 200,000. That is both folks that are retiring as well as those that are potentially getting out after an initial term of service. So their military experience could vary anywhere from the 3 to 5 year period up to the 25 or 30 year period and beyond on that as well. And then the final not so fun number that I'll sort of share here is $910. $910. So this past National Defense Authorization Act, which is the military's budget, that sum total was probably just shy of about $800 billion. It was right around 778. Ironically, in the Pentagon, the math gets fuzzy at that, even at those large numbers. But $910 is what is in the Department of Defense's budget for each transitioning service member for that actual transition program. that actual transition program, which again, I think is a start piece and part of the challenge and part of the environment that we just have to keep in mind in this particular space. So beyond some of those numbers, though, this notion of learning to serve after service, I think, can be difficult for a variety of ways, right? So at a high level of generality, right, I think there's actually three sort of first order questions that sort of interact, that reinforce and explain an aspect of those numbers. And they're really actually questions of identity, right? You know, the culture within each of our armed services is so strong. This question of really, who am I? Beyond what am I going to do when I grow up, which can be an interesting question to ask when you're in your 40s. You know, those are real key concerns that folks have, and they exist in a very broad context. It also often comes with families, with other responsibilities that are there. It's questions about the future, which are always uncertain. And as they are fraught with uncertainty, they can be fraught with stress in terms of what those options are. And then there's also this concern of how to make the right choices that are going to be best, that is in an uncertain future, which are also having all these questions of identity that come into it. And I think the best way I've heard it summarized is that those first order questions can then sort of generate these gaps. And sometimes it's almost an inexplicable gap in confidence that exists. Sometimes it's just a pure information gap, right? In terms of what an employer needs to hear, what options are really there. And then there's actually sometimes gaps in creativity too, and add a little bit more of a one-on-one and a personal touch element, which is, again, I think is one of the beautiful things about all of our approaches in the Mason School. These sort of gaps are key things, I think, that I try to keep in mind while working in this space and focused in on our students. Now, the gaps, that was at a very high level of generality, right? The gaps actually sort of manifest themselves differently. And then in terms of like basic sort of typologies of our veteran students, we have some students that are pure transitioning veterans, right? They have completed their military service. They are going to be job seekers that are almost very often using a GI Bill and Veterans Administration benefits. But what's usually sort of interesting that I've sort of picked up on is in the full-time programs, they actually tend to have a little bit less experience than some of the other military students that we have. But in our part-time, in our MBA programs, they actually have more experience. So I think that's an interesting and important piece to keep in mind. But the other trend and theme that I sense with this particular group is that they also have a challenge of immediacy, right? You know, they are looking for that next opportunity. They are trying to figure things out before really doing the hard preparatory work for that. And that sort of contrasts with our other population, and that's our active duty students, right? You know, so some of those folks, like our James Wright Fellows, is probably the prototypical example. They'll go through this extraordinary educational experience, but then they might have another 5, 8, 10 years of service still there. And their challenge, because of that additional service, is then one of latency. How do they stay connected, right? You know, in terms of the transitioning veteran and the immediacy, how can we provide direct services immediately? In terms of the active duty students, first and foremost, how can we impart them with skills which will make our Army, our Navy, our Marine Corps, our Air Force better? But then additionally, how can we maintain those points of connection so when they do need to make that transition, we can really, really maximize that for them as well. So those, I think, are really interesting things for us to keep in mind when we sort of consider what this sort of microcosm of the veteran transition space that exists at the Mason School is and does. Now, when we look at our students, this is our rough numbers. One of the things that I've learned over the past 6 months is numbers associated with veterans always probably should have multiple asterisks on them because it's based off self-reporting. There's based off a number of different things. Many of the folks on this call have been able to contribute to this. But the other broad context that I'd like to refer back to is actually that 7%, right? You know, veterans constitute 7% of the working population in each of our different sort of major, particularly the graduate level, at each of our different programs, we have high concentrations of military affiliated folks. And I think that's a good thing. I think it needs to be in balance, right? You know, any transition or transformative experience has to be balanced, right? You know, everyone was coming out of the military and just going into a program that was solely for veterans. University of Southern California actually experimented with this a couple of years ago. They had a VBA degree, Veterans in Business Administration degree, where it was just solely veterans. I think that actually doesn't help somebody like really wrestle with who they want to be. It doesn't help them really address those first order questions that are there. But I think this is a key component to look at, right? You know, just because you can see those that are on active duty in each of our different sort of programs. The James Wright Fellows are a little bit different just because they're only here for that 14-month period. But I think that is just a key thing to keep in mind. And it also gives us this huge opportunity. It's I think a point of confirmation in terms of the military friendliness, but then it also gives us this opportunity to really be inclusive of this particular group, fully acknowledging that a veteran is going to have multiple identities that we need to be cognizant of and integrate in as best we can. But we can also be really empowering in some interesting ways. And we're leading the effort here throughout William and Mary. Roughly, I think a good way to think of it, there's about, we think, 350-ish veteran students at William and Mary. 250 roughly are here in the Mason School. There's about 50 undergraduate veteran students that identify right now, 20 over in the law school, about 30 in the School of Education, and only about 8 or 9 in the School of Arts and Sciences at the graduate level. So that again is just a little bit of a snapshot in terms of what our population looks like. Now, going back to this challenge, you know, what are we sort of doing about it? And my sort of approach is to have listened over these past couple of months and really take advantage of this opportunity to have a very William and Mary-esque approach, right? You know, to build bridges, to build connections, right? You know, here's a little sketch of the Crimdell Bridge, right? You know, and I'm struck by the plaque that's there. It talks about dispelling shadows, because when you talk about these gaps of confidence and imagination, we're trying to dispel shadows. And I think that's a key thing as we look to bridge those gaps, to mitigate those things as best we can. And then also to this notion of connecting, right? This notion of connection is something that I think is highly important. Not only connecting people, but also a unique experience, a wonderful education with emerging opportunities. And that really, I think, is at the heart of things. And that's what sort of got us to the mission of the center, right? You know, with the verbs, I think, of being able to develop and empower are really important. And in some cases, I think they will make us a differentiating institution in a positive way. And I'll highlight a little bit of that towards the end of my comments. But we're also in this for the long haul as we make those connections. And each of these elements then have both an internal and a little bit of an external focus that obviously we will focus in providing the direct support to the students that are there. But then we can have an external perspective of this notion of how can we maximize our corporate relationships to get feedback, right? In terms of what they're seeing, not just from William and Mary students, but veterans in general. How can we take that information and use those relationships really to maximize the opportunities that abound. Now, how we execute that mission, and the thing that I want to try and always keep at the forefront of all of our minds, is to be as collaborative and as integrative as possible, but to do so for the long haul, right? So from applicant to alumni, I think that there's a number of different opportunities. And that's really what this chart is trying to outline, right? You know, so when someone is even at the application stage, you know, when they're here for a candidate interview, one of the wonderful things that Amanda and Josh have been able to do is to incorporate one-on-one conversations like they do with many of our centers with this piece, just for us to be able to explain what our numbers look like, what the community looks like from a veteran perspective. That initial connection, absolutely important. And then as we then move that process past the offer of admission to when we're really getting them ready to transition into William and Mary, that's another really important aspect where we're able to welcome them. Amanda and I, and actually Brandon Thomas, one of the James Wright Fellows who volunteered, has sort of set up a sponsorship program where our current James Wright Fellows are then matched up one-on-one with the incoming James Wright Fellows as a bit of a pilot, right? To use that opportunity just to have an additional voice to answer questions that are there. It's a key piece on that, as well as then just one-on-ones, right? That are able to integrate in of what we're doing here at the Center for Military Transition. And then that DVS orientation is also to inform folks of what the Virginia Department of Veteran Services offers, right? Which are significant benefits that are on top of federal benefits. Again, being a recent, newly arrived resident of the Commonwealth, to this day, I'm still discovering different opportunities and benefits. As a veteran myself, that's worked in the veteran support space for quite a while. Those are key things that we can move to. The other aspect that we can then move to next when we talk about orienting folks is different partnerships with nonprofits. The former head of LinkedIn's military and veteran services actually now runs a nonprofit, and they have a short 3-day course that's called Navigating Next, right? So one of the interesting dynamics, and goes back to that point where almost half of transitioning veterans say they need time to figure things out. One of the things that our transitioning veteran students think when they're arriving to business school is that, hey, I got 2 years to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. And they get here and they get a wonderful set of resources, but then they also get a surprise of like, hey, actually, no, in about 4 to 6 weeks time, you're going to have to go in front of a recruiter and set the conditions for internship for a career. This Navigating Next piece helps them sort of figure that out. And it's something that we can augment in. I've had some initial conversations with Carlene and the programs team of the timing of that for, again, those incoming transitioning veteran students. And the plus of Navigating Next as well is, as in talking with that, which they'll offer free of charge, they can also do it virtually too. So again, that's a key component when we think of our broad veteran student community. And again, almost 150 of those folks are in our online programs. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then that's something that augments what is also just such a critical aspect of the integration that's going on in this building in the August timeframe. And then there's also opportunities just to partner, right, with the different centers that are here to augment, the wonderful services that the EPs provide, that the GCMC provides, that students pick up in the principal professional, which, oh, by the way, then for like our active duty students to be able to keep track of some of those wonderful drills and exercises that they might want to revisit 5 years from now, right? I mean, that is, again, a point of continuity that the center can be able to use, as well as then in that intake piece to identify, hey, here's a veteran student that is interested in finance. If that's the case, a wonderful point of collaboration where all these centers are interacting. Likewise, then, is that veteran interested in entrepreneurial efforts? And then we can augment the wonderful services that Graham and Rachel provide at the EC with veteran-focused relationships, right? I mean, JP Morgan Chase has a venture capital element that just focuses on military veteran startups. That's what the one icon that's down there. And likewise, when we then look to connect, again, students with opportunities, we have this chance to build on what they've been able to do in Navigating Next to get them out to the National Black. And then about a month after that, there is a job conference solely for veterans that are getting or have an MBA or an MSBA. The benefit of that is that the job seeker population, that conference gets pretty small, and the job offerings there are almost the same as what you see at some of the larger conferences that are a component of that too. So that is just a long way to describe what, from the user experience, the opportunities that we really have to collaborate and integrate on these things. Let's see, a couple of other points. The other thing I wanted to sort of comment on is that when we talk about those external networks, and Mike, I thank goodness every day that I'm able to be able to be on your team, is to think about how we can use the relationships we have, as well as a new angle sometimes to even, expand those relationships as well. And I think that's one of the interesting things that sort of exists here. And it relates back to, again, the typologies of the different student veteran groups that we have, right? Particularly with our active duty folks. And we have the opportunity now with some structure to maintain contact with them, because certain companies, Johnson & Johnson is a great example, has a specific internal leadership development program for veterans that are at the mid to senior grades within officer and non-commissioned officer ranks. That's a new relationship. And a new angle in a relationship that not only benefits some of our James Wright Fellow alumni, but it has then the opportunity to expand and burgeon and help this institution and the university, I think, frankly and candidly, as a whole. I think that is a key element, as well as Brian was introducing, some of the nonprofits that are helping veterans transition, which might push them to be wonderful candidates in any of our programs, are also helping veterans and military spouses find other aspects of employment. And I think that aspect of synergy is a key thing to keep in mind. Then it's more than just Department of Veteran Services or Department of Defense or the Veteran Affairs, right? The Small Business Administration has a small arm that's focused on veteran entrepreneurial efforts. The Department of Labor, the Department of Education, each of those sort of components, again, are additional aspects of the relationships that we can continue to build and I think benefit from broadly. Now, the other big thing that this allows us to do is that if one were to go to like the Student Veterans of America Conference, there's a Journal of Veteran Studies that's run out of the University of Oklahoma. A lot of the conversation is on what's the difference between military friendly and military inclusive. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. That the first definitions that you'll see as you work your way down the column it's from my favorite dictionary, which is the New Oxford American Dictionary. And I trust this is a safe place to share that I actually have my favorite type of dictionary. But the key element on this is really welcoming, right? That as this veteran support community really focuses on veteran friendly, military friendly, as the removal of different barriers, right? To really make sure that there's some of accommodations, there's benefits that assist people to enter into this environment. And I think that's a good start. And it's a start, candidly, that William and Mary and the Mason School has done for decades. And I think that's a key piece. Now, military inclusive takes that up a step in terms of its substance, right? Again, it's providing as much equal access to those opportunities and resources to folks who might not be aware of them, might not have that opportunity. But I think it's also important to consider the person in this as really an integral whole, right? There's not a stereotype, right? We have more than the two choices of someone that is either Captain America or Captain Marvel or, broken, right? You have all of these different experiences that are there. But then this is really focused in on intent, right? Are these programs really designed to integrate folks, to allow them to flourish, to allow them to belong? Again, words that matter and that are values of the nation's alma mater. And again, I think it's also an encouragement to allow veterans to fully benefit from this. The other trend that again, a bit of a generalization, but veteran students are sometimes too stoic, right? They wait too long sometimes to take full advantage of the different resources that are there. And knowing this and creating an environment that helps to integrate that in, I think, is a wonderful antidote to that piece. And the comprehensiveness of those programs is also sort of important. Now, what is not talked about, and I think what is actually at the heart of all the efforts that we have here, is a notion of military empowering, right? It goes back to what our mission statement shared with many of you on this call that the center is focused in on. No one in the veteran support space is really talking about this now, and I think it is actually has the potential to really be an area of growth where we can demonstrate not only through statement but demonstrate through action and results what this looks like. And I think it has a high degree of fungibility to think about, other places where veteran students converge in different aspects of demographics and first generation low income efforts. But again, the notion that it is long-term support, it's tailored to that individual experience that's there. It's personalized, and it's drawing on all sorts of different resources throughout there. So again, this is something that I think is an exciting. I think it's a key component of a story that we'll be able to tell, and it's a key component of constituent elements that have been here for a long time. And again, I really just sort of look forward to a discussion of this. The primary point of this was really just to sort of share a little bit of my thought and rationale with this group, and then open it up to questions, reactions, things that I've missed or have gotten wrong, and what you would like to see.
Hey, JD.
Yes, Kim.
I love the presentation. Would you back up one slide,
Sure
your
thing.
takeaway slide?
Yeah.
As we're out talking with alumni who are also passionate about this area, tell us what kind of additional funding opportunities you need that go along with making this slide possible. What would money be spent on in addition to the funding that you have for the center?
I think some of the funding that can be sent on is actually helping to provide resources for a wide array of different sort of certificates, right? So in many cases, as I am learning, our degrees, particularly on the MBA side, are a generalist approach. And when we really want to maximize opportunity, getting different types of certifications are wonderful opportunities that are there. And that applies to both of those populations, both the transitioning veterans as well as that active duty population. What's really, I think, an interesting opportunity is there's a lot of talk within the veteran support space of how do you help somebody translate a military experience for a civilian context. One of the great examples is actually the project management professional certification or the Agile certification that's there. Those, in some cases, frighteningly, are really similar to military planning processes, right? So one of the huge benefits of getting that certification, it helps to just answer questions very concise on a resume, but it also gives that veteran the lexicon of a different context, right? So that is right in the wheelhouse of there, and being able to provide, even if it's a mini grant to an alumni that is finding that opportunity, I think that's a great use of potential funds that are there as one particular example that could exist.
Thanks.
JD.
Yes, sir. Mike.
Awesome presentation. We talked about, ways that we'll partner together, GCMC, in particular with corporate relations and how we connect with organizations. I know you have that top list of companies that you're looking to partner with. One thing I'll share with you, as I mentioned before, we just finished some analysis on our hiring data over the past 4 years, as well as where companies are engaging across all of Mason, from online programs, part-time EMBA, to capstones, to field consultancies. So I think that'll be helpful data for you to see. And then together we can partner to determine the top companies we want to go into together, promoting, as the tip of the spear, the Center for Military Transition, especially when there's a strong opportunity for recruiting our veterans at that organization, much like a Navy Federal and companies like that. But I'm not sure if you wanted to talk a little bit about, I think some of the top companies people are familiar with, but maybe if you could just mention some of the top companies that you're looking to partner with, with the CMT as well as the GCMC.
Absolutely. And some of these companies, some of the source of those companies is it's really sort of best of in industry that have specific, what I find very intriguing and potentially transformative is companies that have specific leadership development programs that allow, after someone is hired, sort of a round robin, sometimes even as much as 36 months of seeing different components of that company before they really then are able to focus things in. I think that's smart because it goes back to what that survey data says, is that veterans need additional time to really fine tune some things. So if they get the culture match right, then if having that opportunity is key. Johnson & Johnson has a wonderful program. JP Morgan Chase does as well. Procter & Gamble. And again, these are wonderful sort of things because each of those, I mean, two of those, I mean, we have close executive partner ties to that, which is another thread that we can weave into this. United Health Services, right? You know, the namesake of Miller Hall. That company, again, is a key one. So we have industry leaders. We have sort of what Mike and I have sort of talked about. I think of almost like sort of niche finds. You know, Huntington Ingalls is one of those very close William, you know, Mason School connection. Textron, and again, these are both in the defense industries. I think those are another sort of category. And then the other piece that I'm looking at, my sort of third tier, is literally following the data, looking past the past 5 years. And Mike, thanks for your help on that. Patrice, as well. You know, PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? You know, that's one where our veteran students have been hired to. Deloitte, another significant one, as well as Booz Allen. And again, I think when we start to expand out, having more experienced alumni starting to get into that mix can actually help us then go back and forth with, say, like Deloitte, right? You know, is that then again an opportunity for us to potentially, I know sometimes companies have different sort of tiers that they look at different institutions to fall into. Is this another angle where we might be able to shift that conversation a little bit, or at least start the conversation?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Mike. Juliana.
First, thanks for presenting all of that, JD. I think it's just so exciting to see all these numbers. I had no idea about some of the information you share here, so I really appreciate you sharing that. My experience as an international student in the MBA program was actually one of the reasons why I chose William & Mary. It was because I would be exposed to military peers, and actually that was the differentiator. These and the executive partners is the things that we can never find in another school besides William & Mary. So definitely is a differentiator for our degree, for our program. So I truly appreciate that you're on board and just now part of the team. So my question for you is, you mentioned about these trainings and workshops, the agile, the project management, that they're like being exposed to. And I think this is a fantastic idea for all our students. I think it's a great idea. But one of the things that was really like, I learned so much from my military peers for things that I was never exposed before. So like, I can say like all people from military in my class, everybody had like outstanding communication skills. So like all of them were like outstanding communicators, outstanding leaders whenever dividing tasks. So I feel I learned so much, and I got really close friends there. I have a military background, and I've never been exposed to that before because in my country, we don't even have military forces. So I was wondering if like one of the projects that could be something interesting for them is being exposed for creating workshops to share their knowledge, right? So like they could just like be teaching what are the techniques to be a better leader, right? What is the styles of being a leader? Just to teach other students the things that our military students are really good at.
Yeah, Juliana, I'm so glad that you asked that question. I think particularly on some aspects of the communication skills that are there. The other component, and I've been talking with Dr. Kelly Crace over at the Center for Authentic Excellence there too, is that there's both an opportunity for our military students to share some of their leadership experiences, as well as an opportunity for them to grow in their leadership experiences. Because one of the, maybe it's a neat thing, here's a fun fact, right? You know, when you're a commander in the United States Army, right? You know, the things that you say to the people that are in your unit are a law, right? You know, so when push comes to shove, or if it's super early in the morning or very rainy outside, or in the most extreme of conditions, when human life is at risk, words are law. And so leadership in some ways is honed in those extreme circumstances, but in other ways, you have massive authority. I mean, I think there's a wonderful growing opportunity to learn how to lead in new contexts that a military student here can both simultaneously benefit from as well as contribute to that conversation. And that's sort of my thinking and approach on those things. Military leadership is excellent in some ways. Tragically, in other ways, military leadership has been extremely wanting. And American military leadership has been extremely wanting. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind in that particular balance. But yeah, I'm all on board of looking at potentially different sort of micro classes, because that is a wonderful way to get at not only including and integrating, but then also empowering with an eye towards growth too.
Absolutely. And
But
not
yeah,
only
yeah.
specific skill, like doesn't need to be just leadership or communication, but just sharing their story. I remember the first time I heard a war story and how they like structure that, how they plan the strategy. Like I have a background working for Deloitte. There's so many similarities about creating a strategy, right? So it was so inspiring for me. So definitely one of my favorite parts of William & Mary is what you guys do. So thanks for everything you do here at William & Mary.
No, thank you, Juliana. Great points. Cool, Brian. Well, I think we are probably right at time, but I will be more than happy to hang out. I am up here on the third floor. It's a great space. One of the interesting pieces too, as more of the student veterans have sort of come up here, I've sort of encouraged them to bring other members of their learning teams, particularly in the MBA programs, up here as well. But it was about 2 weeks ago. And this particular session is extremely challenging, at least for the first years right now. But we had a wonderful example where actually one of our undergraduate majors, our undergraduate major was helping a couple of our MBA students work out the equation that supported the supply and demand curve that was a part of a class that they had on Chinese currency manipulation. Right, and so then you have this wonderful sort of ecosystem where, again, an undergraduate is doing the math and helping some of our MBA students figure out something in a particular piece. And that's the other, I think, wonderful opportunity that we have. When we look at space, by no means is this area a lounge. We don't need a lounge, in particular a lounge that is potentially exclusionary and it's titling. But what we have here is actually a functional space where learning and growth can occur, and I will accept any space to be able to do that. Right, I would probably push back. Maybe the showers down in the basement aren't the best place, but that opportunity, I think, is a key one. So yeah, that's the last little anecdote that I'll share. But again, thanks for everybody's attention, effort, and passion on this topic.
Well, thank you, JD. Before I wrap it up, were there any last questions? Right. Well, thank you, JD, for talking to us today. We really enjoyed your presentation. I saw Dean Pulley put in the chat that you should definitely give this presentation to faculty. So we'll see about arranging that one of these days so that you can get in front of them and show all the great work that you're doing to actually support what they're doing as well. You mentioned the spirit of collaboration and support that student was giving others. And, that's what we're here for. And the military affiliated and veteran students definitely bring that to the table because of their jobs. So we definitely gain from them being a part of the Mason School. Thank you all for participating in our Lunch and Learn today. We will have another one in a few weeks. I believe that is March 17th with our Executive Partner Program. Phil Tuning will be joining us, and a calendar invite will be going out for that very, very soon. As always, appreciate you all, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.